been told that Christianity is the oldest, largest movement in history, which then convinces us it's the only way to heaven or the ultimate road to hell. We've been told that it grew throughout the ages because the truth of the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus was so powerful and glorious. But what if I told you the Christian movement was based on force, greed, and guilt rather than truth, love, and light? If we study the birth of the Christian movement from the lens of the church or religion, we get a sense of divine, radical achievements led by righteous men. Peel back the layers, and this story gets messy, dirty, and decisively bloody. I'm going to bypass traditional scriptures and even the Apocrypha Nag Hammadi texts. Instead, let's simply review history. We've been led to believe that Jesus' message was so powerful, so life-changing, that his religious movement spread like wildfire across the globe. But the original message was hijacked by Paul in his central message of moral rules and moral obligations became the only way to salvation. And those rules had dire consequences on the masses. It was a do this or else mentality. Jesus' original followers told their stories through methodology and internal guidance. Their message was wild with freedom from the very things that would eventually bind the masses back into organized control, bound by overbearing rules and regulations that made it near impossible for anyone to follow. It created sin. It created fear. It created a curse that would be handed down from generation to generation. A curse so powerful that it would get imprinted within our DNA. Paul skewed the original testimonies and put his own spin on it, one that claims grace and love, but also tells us how sinful we are, how corrupt we are, how unable we are to ever be perfect. But even so, we desperately need to seek moral perfection. His vision would become the catalyst for poverty and royal power over the people. The church would dictate how much your life was worth based on your moral sins. Christianity, in its rawest form of religion, was forced upon the masses. It was rarely a choice. They kept the Bible hidden from the peasants and even kings in power. This way, no one would ever realize that they were mere puppets on strings. Kings would do the bidding of the church out of the need for loyalty from Rome or more power and land grabs. But I've gotten way ahead of myself. Let's take this back even further. The Hebrews carried an ancient understanding of the divine consciousness from their Lemurian ancestors. They were named the Hebrews, or the ones who crossed over from the other side. They carried the high-frequency knowledge of oneness, or the collective consciousness. They crossed the Euphrates River into Canaan, coming from the other side of the water. They were the ones who crossed over the boundary of consciousness. They crossed over from the ancient, fluid, multidimensional realm of Lemuria and early Atlantean unity and into the dense world of 3D linear time, separation, and the physical matrix. The crossover was literally a separation from what they knew into how they would adapt to the new world they entered after the flood. And from that separation, more separation was inevitable. Once they landed into the Levant and Mesopotamia, their cohesive unit began to fracture into territorial tribes and regions. At this point, they were losing their direct telepathic lineage from the divine source and built proxy gods to replace it. We've been told throughout the centuries that the Hebrews always worshiped only one God. The Bible said so, so it must be true. But ancient texts and archaeological discoveries beyond the Bible beg to differ. In the north was El Elyon, or Most High. This god was distant and lived in the sky, seated at the head of a cosmic council called Elohim, which was a plural word meaning divine ones. Many of us learned this term as meaning the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. El was mostly peaceful. Now, the south created Yahweh, who was an angry deity of storm and war. When they migrated north, they eventually combined their two gods into one. Every neighboring tribe created their own customized bodyguard god to justify their conquests for land, which led to the ultimate turf war. The Moabites created Hamash, a fierce deity who demanded absolute loyalty and, during extreme crises, child sacrifice to guarantee military victory. The Ammonites worshipped Milcom, or Molech, a god of structural order, fire, and political power. The Philistine and Phoenicians looked to varieties of Baal, a storm and fertility god who controlled the rain and the crops. If your tribe went to war with the next valley over, it wasn't just men fighting. It was a clash of your manufactured tribal thought forms of gods. If you won the battle, it proved your God was stronger than theirs. By fragmenting into tribes and inventing regional jealous war gods, they turned the planet into a bloody matrix of border disputes. Disputes that would continue throughout time, never ceasing, not even today. This would be the forever religious focus. The Jewish religious leaders were frustrated that Jesus was somehow getting plopped into their God. And quite frankly, Jesus didn't want that either. He never saw the Jewish God as his father or the one true God. Jesus came to free us from that idea completely. But his whole message got tangled into a web of sin, hell, and forced following. This became Christianity. And this movement angered the Jews, leading them to once again create a new God. To the temple elite, God was a closed-loop, legalistic external landlord who lived in a specific stone box, spoke exclusively through a male priesthood, and demanded a constant stream of animal blood and silver coins to keep him from destroying their nation. Jesus revealed to the masses that their God was a scam and held no purpose to reality. This dismantling created religious chaos. But again, I got ahead of myself. So let's back up once again to the Babylonian exile, sometime around the 6th century BC. Before this time, the Israelite tribes were all worshiping various deities. A group of elite scribes called the Deuteronomists began rewriting the old scrolls, erasing the plural nature of the divine source, turning God into an all-encompassing dictator, demanding money, land, and sacrifice. Why would God need those things? He didn't, but the elite did. This mentality continues throughout the ages. Religious leaders compensated from the sins they created to keep you under their control, emotionally, mentally, financially, and eternally. The early followers of the Christ movement weren't using a New Testament. It didn't exist yet. They were using the Septuagint, which was the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. And they were using it to show that the ancient prophets were talking about a universal cosmic shift in consciousness, the Christos. This revealed that the Jewish God was useless and fake, an illusion of manipulation and control. In 90 AD, after the Jewish temple was destroyed by Rome, The Jews were frantically trying to rewrite their history to keep the Jesus freaks from invading their God. Before this time, women were prophets, teachers, and leaders. Early mystics knew that the divine source was a combination of both masculine and feminine frequencies. But then comes along Paul and his disciples, not Yeshua's disciples. That's key. They began demonizing women and their important roles within the way, or the Christ movement. This religion told women to just shut up. They held no value anymore. Around 110 AD, Ignatius of Antioch began the notion that religious leaders high up the God ladder should be seen as the Lord himself. They replaced the inner spiritual guide Yeshua taught, a community of oneness, balance, and harmony with each other, and turned it into a male-dominated dictatorship, literally lording over people. This is why, throughout time, those in royal roles were called lords. By 180 AD, there was a big problem the Christian movement had to face. The Gnostics and mystics were creating a large counter movement, not to compete, but to live freely from the religious constraints the Christian movement was placing on the people. They began writing the Nag Hammadi text with claims that heaven is a state of inner awareness that would be revealed outward and wasn't a physical afterlife place you had to work at achieving to get to. Irenaeus of Lyons countered their claims with his hit piece Against Heresies, declaring the four Gospels the law. This is also where sin was introduced as disobedience, not just to God, but to the church itself. This is where history flips, and the greatest story ever told becomes the greatest curse put on humanity. Governmental and religious laws were put in place against anyone practicing meditation, channeling the divine, or simply believing the original message of Yeshua. And by 325 AD, Constantine built the first megachurch, adjoining the Jewish texts to Paul's cultish religion. This cage was built for the world, not just for specific ethnic groups or regions. All other world religions, stories, and histories were seen as a crime, punishable by torture and death. With this newfound religion, church leaders held immense powers, controlling even royalty and keeping them at bay, always forcing them to prove their godly worth through wars, demands for church building, and a massive taxation on what the kings took in from the poor. Tithes was a way to keep the religious elite well-fed and fat and in utter control. It was a threat, and it still is today. If you're facing financial difficulties, it's because God is punishing you for not paying your 10%. Churches love this message. It's always the first item at hand at every Christian service around the world, despite your denomination. You're lectured first about how you'll be blessed based on the blessing you give to them, so they can live off your income and guilt. Then the baskets make their way to every pew as sorrowful worship music adds to the aura of shame. We're lucky that's all we have to deal with in this day and age. The Roman Church considered every vulnerability of mankind and weaponized it. Every sexual deed, every broken relationship, every bastard child, and every sinful thought had a price tag attached to it. Let's look at the ultimate sin deal, donatio pro anima, or gifts for the soul. Sin acted like an accounting ledger. Every sin was a debt to God that had to be accounted for. It could only be settled here on earth through a priest who, as I stated earlier, was designated to act as God himself. And when you have that kind of power over people to control their every move with threats of eternal damnation, fear was the ultimate power play of the game. When a wealthy lord, knight, or independent farmer looked like he wouldn't survive an illness, it was canon law to call for the priest. The church had exclusive first and last rights at the deathbed. There he would conduct an audit of the dying man's sins according to the moral laws set by the church. The priest would then paint a pretty picture of purgatory, thousands of years of skin-peeling fire. Terrified of this destination, the dying man, gasping for breath, would seek a way to bypass this route. And lo and behold, magically would appear a pre-written legal deed to forfeit his land to that specific abbey for atonement. If the heirs of the land objected, they too would face the cruelty of excommunication. And while that doesn't sound all that painful to us today, back then it was a death sentence in society. You might as well be a leper. So through psychological warfare, the church became immensely wealthy landlords. When we dig into the Dark Ages and medieval times, we witness heathens and pagans converting to Christianity with a blind eye. It wasn't out of reverence or belief. It was for control and acceptance. In order for the Danes who conquered England to be fully accepted by the people as their king, they had to earn their trust by converting to their regional god. No one was getting saved or delivered from their pagan ideology. They took the Christian God to appease the minds of the people and the church, who, of course, was the ultimate authority. Christianity was a fear-based, hardcore mafia. The religious leaders couldn't commit the atrocities of murder and war, so they forced the lords and the people to do their dirty work with the promise of absolution and grand places in heavenly realms. They were forced to kill those who objected to their God and ways of worship. If you didn't believe, you were a walking death sentence. Whether you believed it or not, the fear alone drove the masses to do the unthinkable in the name of Christ. Rome and their centralized, organized, fear-based religion ruled the empire across the globe. We think Christianity was built on love and freedom because the message was so inspiring. That's what we've been led to believe. We see it as the number one religion in the world because it's so freeing and peace-filled. I never felt free, and I never knew peace. I don't see freedom in the world, and I definitely don't see peace. Never have. I don't know anyone who was converted by the message of love, but rather the message of eternal damnation if they didn't convert. I was one of those people. And when I began this channel, that was all anyone could use against me. Threats of hell. Rome held the keys to prestige and honor. With their approval, you could gain wealth, armies, and women. Yeah, women. Sold for a price and a purpose. Her value was meaningless otherwise. As a king, you had to earn those prizes, and in order to win, you had to fund and build churches across the realm. Then you had to build a military to defend it and its wealth. The dark precedent was established when Clovis I, king of the Franks, underwent conversion in 496 AD. Through his submission to Roman baptism, he secured the immediate support of the Gallo-Roman bishops, the true gatekeepers of socioeconomic authority within the territory. He was ordered to build churches and monasteries in order to maintain that alliance. And while many of us admire the beauty of these cathedrals and churches, they were never established as a place of worship and prayer to honor God. They were built to instill terror and awe. You might be thinking, well, that's not so terrible. They built great structures that allowed people to bare their souls and confess their sins so they could achieve eternal salvation. But at what price? The kings not only had to fund these fear chambers, they had to forfeit the land surrounding it as well. Thousands upon thousands of acres of land was appointed to Rome, immune from taxation. How convenient. So why would kings agree then to this mafia-style takeover? Well, it was the perfect money laundering control loop. Kings made tithing an imperial law. It was a capital crime not to pay 10% of crops, income, and animals to the local church. The military then enforced the church's collection of tithes and land, and in return, the local priests would preach at the pulpit how disobeying the king's orders was a direct sin against God, a mortal sin that would send you straight to hell. And this was on top of state taxes already bogging the common folk down into poverty. Now, if a king refused these terms, the Pope could declare the king's crown invalid, and neighboring good Christian kings were encouraged to invade those territories and take the land, relinquishing all his power and authority. To keep his throne, a king was forced to grovel. Emperor Henry IV once begged forgiveness outside the Pope's castle, kneeling in the snow, promising to build more monasteries, hand over more land, and enforce more moral laws. After a while, kings soon learned that their conversion didn't serve them at all. In fact, Rome was using the king's desperate need for power while turning the entire European continent into a slave mindset, money-making machine. As a peasant, you paid the ultimate price. You lived in perpetual fear of eternal hell if you weren't morally acceptable to the king or the church. To make it easier on the people, the 16th century Vatican revealed the taxes of the apostolic chancery. It was a literal line item price list for the absolution and dispensation of sin. Just an example. One of the highest moral crimes was reading heretical thoughts or reading banned books at 12 to 14 gross or silver coins. This beat out murder by 5 to 7 gross. This is how they valued life versus strict and utter slavery to the cause. If you couldn't pay in silver or gold, you were forced into literal slavery or forfeit your land and livestock. Christianity was not some divine, beautiful love fest that people were desperate to be a part of. It was forced on them through laws, payments, and threats. The church became the mainstay of society throughout the ages because it was built into the fabric of everyday life through control and fear, not because it was freeing. In fact, it was the complete opposite. It took away your rights. It made you slaves to the curse of the Bible. They put a price on the human conscience to pay for their royal robes and marble palaces. The hierarchy is still in place today all over the world. That's not Christianity. That's literal hell. This wasn't new. This was the Babylon way, which became the Jewish way, which became the Roman way, which became the only way. The curse in desperate need of being reversed. You can reverse that curse by simply waking up to the reality of these truths. But we've been beaten down for so many generations that our DNA can't comprehend it, refuses to acknowledge it, and is fearful to see it. That's the real psyop we're all living under today. Thank you for watching. This video was inspired by a new book I am currently reading, Pilgrim by Mitchell Luthi. I know my videos are controversial and unnerving at times, My intention isn't to change your mind, but rather to use it critically. Your support means a great deal to me. Some of the recent comments I've received have truly been meaningful and encouraging, and I really do appreciate all of you. So thank you. I will see you next time.